IDP Talks, one of a series of sessions where we try and help you improve your English and improve your IELTS score. My name is Don Oliver, and you've probably seen me before if you've been tuning in at other times. Welcome to everybody, wherever you are. If you've been following our series of webinars, I hope you've got a lot of useful information from them. But today we're going to do something a little bit different, and that is we're talking to someone who teaches IELTS preparation and someone who has a unique insight into learning English as a second language, and also someone who has the experience of moving to a new country. We're going to talk to Rochelle van der Merwe, and she originally came from South Africa, and her first language is not English. Her first language is Afrikaans. This is the language she mainly speaks at home, but as an expert in English, she has been working with IDP and other people as a language specialist working in preparing students for the IELTS test. She is a specialist language coach. Now, Rochelle is a very lively and energetic teacher, so I'm sure you'll find what she has to say very inspiring. Not only will you be inspired and learn something about English, you'll also learn something about her experience in adapting to a new country. So without any more talk from me, I'd like to introduce you to Rochelle. Hello, Rochelle.
Hello, Don. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. And hello, everybody. It's nice to be able to do this. One of my favorite things is to bring clarity and sort of demystify the learning process when it comes to language learning.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in preparing students for the IELTS test?
Yes, well, it's always interesting having students come to me with these ideas of where they think they may lack, and students always want to focus on where they're lacking and what they should improve on, and they kind of forget that they should also focus on their strengths, what they're good at, because that is just as important. And another thing is about the approach we should have to this test is also important. People go into the interview and they're not quite sure what we expect from them. And they treat it incredibly formally and get so almost like a job interview. And we want to say this test is not only about language, it's about how you use the language.
So it sounds a little bit like you're helping people have a bit of confidence in what they can do, and that will be reflected in their performance.
Yes, and then I also show them what they can work on and how as well. And they are usually pleasantly surprised at, once we break it down, at what they can work on, but also how to go about it.
Do you direct them to the public version of the speaking band descriptors and the writing band descriptors in order for them to work out what they are doing well and what they could improve on?
We cannot do without it. It is essential. So I have it with me all the time. It's so crumbly by now, but I make sure that everybody I speak to, the person I am working with, has this copy either digitally in front of them, because we do this over Zoom, or just in their hands. And once they have an idea of how this works, it makes complete sense in a way. I would usually tell them what makes or breaks an 8 or 7 and this and this.
What are some of the questions that your students ask you about the assessment? in IELTS?
They have quite a few, but some of the questions would be, for example, how could they improve on their lexical resource, as in how can they improve on their vocabulary? What can they do? You normally ask me about topics. What if they get a topic that they know nothing about?
So what's your advice to them about improving their range of vocabulary?
Okay, I told them this is not an IQ test. We are not testing how much you know about the whole world. We are testing how they will deal with situations in English. So if they get a topic, for example, I tell them that, if you get the topic, if you honestly, if you're not sure about it, first check with the examiner. It's okay. We like it when you check with us rather than you having it wrong, because it shows us you can ask for help. If you're not sure about something, that's incredibly important. Number two, once you have an idea of the topic, but you know nothing about it. For example, I like to give the example of, can you tell me about a book you've read that you would like to read again? Now, for example, if you hate reading and you've never read a book and you just can't remember anything your parents have read to you, try to think how you could relate to topic. I say to them, you can do one of two things. One, you could lie and pretend you've read a book that you would like to read again. But that would take extra brain power when you're really nervous in a situation. And later when we ask you about it, you may forgot about your lie and then it won't be coherent. You won't make sense and that could count against you. I usually advise, rather don't lie and see how honest you can be. And you could, for example, take the topic. We never allow to change the topic for you. All the topics, every single topic has been tested and tried. It can work in any situation. But for example, if you've never read a book and you can't remember what you've read, you can adapt the topic. And you could say, okay, you've asked me about a book I've read that I would like to read again. However, I don't like reading. I can't remember anything that's been read to me. So I'll tell you about a movie I've seen that's been based on a book that I would like to see.
Or you could even talk for 2 minutes about why you don't read, and how other people read, and you don't understand why they like to read.
Yes.
And I agree, telling the truth is the best policy, because in the speaking test, there is no task achievement. You don't have to actually answer a question directly, unlike the writing test, because in writing you do need to actually answer a question directly. But in speaking, you can speak around the topic, and that's fine, because the examiner is just listening to the quality of your English. Now, you grew up speaking Afrikaans, right?
Yes.
All the time?
Well, at home, in school, but I also had the family married, one of the family members married a German lady, another one a Portuguese lady, so everyone had to sometimes speak up in English when we were at family gatherings.
Let me ask you a question. As a person who had to learn English actively, what were some of the things that helped you improve your vocabulary and your grammar, etc.?
I will also relate this to learning German, because I've also learned German, and some of the things that help the most, and what I always advise students of the language, is immersing yourself into the language, because your brain is divided into two parts, basically, your left brain and your right brain. And so your left brain is more the rational, logical side, and you need it sort of for your grammatical structures. The rest of your brain, this on the right side, is where we learn music and language. It's your visual and it's your creative side. So you need to listen and you need to see. It wants to see and hear. So you need to listen to conversational English spoken by native speakers. You either need to go to the country or you need to listen to talk shows where they are speaking casually, not lectures. And people ask me about TED Talks. I say, it's great, good information, but make sure it's a native speaker. And then reading lifestyle articles, not academic texts. That's not how we speak in everyday life. You have to read lifestyle articles, and most students are poor because they're students. So on a Saturday, the newspaper, The Age, the Australian, or whichever country you're in, but the newspapers have a part where you can pull out in the middle on a Saturday, and it talks about, it has movie reviews, book reviews, lifestyle articles, and that's fantastic. So I always tell people, just have conversations, interact, and if just walk around with your headphones and listen to podcasts where people are talking with each other, interviews.
And I think probably one thing that you know, as children, when we're learning a language, we're not worried too much about getting everything exactly right.
Excellent point, Don.
We're just taking it all in, and eventually we'll understand the structures and we'll understand why something happens. But I think initially we need to just say, well, that's how it is, you know.
I've been asked this before about why do kids learn languages better, but one of the things is they make it fun for them, and we take it as adults, we make it so boring for ourselves. And I said, just go read things that interest you, go listen to things that fascinate you, and just when you do the speaking test, the last thing you need to do is sit there and overthink it and go, oh my goodness, the grammar. We actually a little bit more lenient on the grammar than in writing, because this is a speaking test. Even native speakers make mistakes.
Yeah, that's right.
And we even allow that for that if you look at the descriptors.
That's an important point, because writing English is not the same as speaking English. We can tolerate, for example, someone who doesn't actually finish a sentence in their speaking, but we don't accept that in writing. So they are different. That's true. Go on.
It's just, if you overthink it, then if you look at the band descriptors in fluency and coherence, fluency is like a car, like you're a car on the highway. Now, if you're cruising at a good speed on the highway with your speech, that's great. But if you go too slow, all the other cars are going to be held up. If you go too fast, you'll make lots of mistakes and crash, and people can't keep up. So with fluency, we need to just talk. We must just stay, you know, we must use a conversational tone, because if we aren't fluent, if we just overthink everything else and we can't relax and just talk, then we will have it will affect our pronunciation, because pronunciation has a few features, and there are 3 features that affect that get directly influenced by the by your fluency, and that is rhythm. Every language is like music. Language has rhythm, and your rhythm will get affected, and that's not worth it. And another thing that gets affected is the way you put your words into groups, word grouping, because if you hesitate or anything like that, it may not sound very natural.
Speaking of groups of words, now this is important, because you mentioned that fluency is related to the pronunciation assessment, because if you are not fluent, you are not flowing in a natural in terms of pronunciation. Would you recommend that people learn chunks of words instead of learning a word, a noun, and then a verb, etc.? Would it be better to learn a phrase?
Well,
when you're learning a language,
I agree completely with you on that. That yes, because I can hear that you're actually also agreeing with this, is that phrases are the best way to, you know, if you look at this word grouping issue, and then when you're listening to conversational English, you will pick it up as you're listening and going, oh my goodness, I just heard that phrase again. Or then you'll read it, you'll see it when you're reading as well, going, oh wow, I just saw this in text as well. And like I said, like a song that gets stuck in your head, some phrases will resonate with you. You'll go, I like that. but others.
It's an interesting point, because sometimes I read students' essays, getting onto writing now for a moment, and they group words in an unnatural way. You know, they might have the wrong adverb with the wrong adjective, or the wrong verb with the wrong noun, and the wrong preposition. And you can always check that quite easily now with Google. If you're not absolutely sure that this phrase is right, just type it into Google with in inverted commas, and you might find that you get no returns. You get, you know, maybe it's used 2 or 3 times. But if you get 1 million people who've used this phrase, then you can be guaranteed that, yeah, that is a natural grouping of words in English. So that's a tip if you are trying to improve your writing as well.
People will suggest it as well.
Yeah.
They may go, do you mean So if you click on this that they mean,
yeah,
you could read about the meaning and see, yes, that is what I meant, actually.
Let's move on. You were talking a little bit about how people approach the test. What are some of the mistakes that you've already mentioned some mistakes that people are too worried about making grammatical errors in their speaking, but what are some of the other errors or faults in a person's approach to doing the test that you have noticed?
Well, let me think about that.
I can think of one, and that is that sometimes a test taker comes into the speaking test and they haven't really been speaking very much English before then. They've been at home speaking Chinese maybe, or Hindi with their housemates, or Arabic, or whatever it is, or Spanish, whatever their language is. And then they expect on the Saturday or whatever day that they're doing the speaking test to be able to be fluent. Now, I would always recommend that they say, okay, I've got a speaking test on Saturday. On Monday, I'm going to make a big effort. And Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, to speak as much English and to listen to as much English as I possibly can.
Yes, I agree 100%. Lockdown was a little bit difficult for everyone when they couldn't really go out and get, out there. But I keep telling people, immerse yourself in this language. Just try to join little groups where you could practice your English and speak to your barista when you're asking for coffee, or at the library, have a little conversation. People really appreciate it when you are trying to do this. It's just that practice.
Your experience coming to a foreign country, now Australia is quite different to South Africa in many ways.
Yes.
Did you find that people responded to you if you were trying to make it? I know your English is perfect, but I mean, are people generally well disposed to talking to strangers in this country?
Oh, very much so. People are very open to it, and they actually quite proud that they want to share with you, but they also like it when you. I've found that in many countries. This also happened to me in Germany. My German was very broken, and I think this is probably how someone would feel when they start out learning English. Excuse me. So
COVID.
This is my tea. So when I went to Germany, for example, my German was quite broken. And the whole time when I was there, it was in the early 90s, a lot of people there could still not, they would all communicate in German. And I always felt like my German was terrible as compared to native speakers. It was so embarrassing. I felt so embarrassed because native speakers would just, sound fantastic. So I never felt like I was on top of it. But then when I went home after just 1 month of being there and having to watch big movies, big box office hits in German, I had to speak to everyone at the grocery store in German. Everyone was speaking German. And I got back and I got to my German class. And the German teacher asked me, how did it go? Tell us in German. I started telling my class and everyone's mouths just dropped. And I realized, oh my goodness, listen to me. I'm just going,
Yeah.
and you don't realize that. So if you are new to the country or you're trying to compare yourself to native speakers, don't do that. And native speakers are not judging you in that sense. When you go to your own country and you're in that class, or if you're in your own country and you go to that class where you are, and you speak in that language after you've been speaking in that language for a while, I promise you it makes a world of difference. A world of difference.
Yeah, that's great advice. So is there anything that you would recommend to people who are having a problem adapting to a new culture as well as the new language? I mean, we've talked about that, touched on it in some ways, but is there anything else that you would recommend, for example, from your experience in Germany?
Yes. So if you are finding it a bit different or alienating in a way, and I remember when I was here, for example, when I came here as well, I joined up with other people from my country just to hear how they're experiencing it. And I also, I just try to speak with people as much as I could from my own work and asking for recommendations where I could go and have a meal or what's happening. Yes, and I was watching a lot of television, and funny enough, I learned a lot from, if something was simple and very nurturing, I liked that. So there's this little program for kids called ABC. There's a station, and this program is called Play School on ABC on the channel. And it was lovely just to kind of listen to the tone and see how people were interacting with each other. And it was done for children, but for me, I just felt, oh, so this is how things happen. I also went on a lot of forums and I read a lot about different people coming to the country and what they experience. And I would take the positive experiences and I would
Is learning about the culture an important part of learning a language, do you think, or not? Can you learn the language and not really be interested in the culture, do you think? It's a difficult question.
It takes away a richness, and thereof, how do I put this? It helps to know about the culture. For me, it definitely helped. I mean, for example, every time in the first year or so, every time somebody said to me, how are you? When I walked into a shop, I would answer, good, thank you, or whatever. And later on, I realized, hold on. Yes, you don't have to answer. And just little things. It really helped to understand certain things. And also, it helps to read some well-recommended books about the country. I read Bill Bryson's book on Down Under, and you learn things. You learn that over in Australia, for example, people don't like to sound too authoritative on something. You don't want to talk down onto people. There's not much of a class divide when it comes to the way you interact with people. And some countries are like that, though. So you have to learn those finer things too. You have to find out about that.
We've been talking mostly about speaking, and there are clear connections between speaking and writing because we're producing English in both cases.
Yes.
But I would also say that someone who is good at speaking, especially pronunciation, is someone who is actually quite good at listening as well. That the better you can hear the rhythms and the pronunciations and those subtle things in a language, the better you'll speak. And I think that all of those skills do relate to each other. The more you read, the better your vocabulary will be for speaking and writing.
I can hear my readers. I can hear it when someone's reading.
Right.
Someone's a reader. You can hear it by a mile.
Right. In what way? How does that show itself to you?
Vocabulary.
Yeah.
Don, you can always recognize my readers. You can hear just the way they put words together. There's just it, and it also reading also, especially when you read lifestyle type articles or whatever, it brings in a different perspective, and you can hear by the way people approach things, but just little things. It's just, you can just hear the way they put their words together. There's just something else that happens with the language.
It's very
sophisticated.
It reminds me of another thing that I learned many years ago when I was studying to be a teacher, that there are different types of learners. Now, for me, I think I'm quite visual. It really helps me. It helps me to actually see a sentence written down, and that helps me understand that sentence. But some people are probably not like that. There will be people out there listening now who use their ears much more and are able to understand things more quickly if they hear them. And there will be other people, of course, who'll need to actually do something at the same time in order to learn things. So is it important for a learner to identify how they learn best, do you think?
It is very important to identify how you learn best, but it's still important to combine, because it's all on that side of the same side of the brain, where you combine your visual with your listening, your seeing with your listening, because it all works in the same way. It is just confirming something that you've just heard. If I hear a word, I need to see how it's spelt to remember it, but I also need to hear it. So it's important to understand how you learn. Definitely it does help.
A lot of the people that are listening now will be saying, yeah, I do all of that stuff, but I can't get beyond 6.5. 6.5, what is it that can take me to a 7 or maybe a 7.5 for my speaking and for my writing? Are there any special tips that you would like to share with us about that? And if you can't, I can.
Well, I'd love to hear what you have to say, Don, and then I'll let you know if I agree.
Well, a 6.5, if we go back to your assessment criteria that you were showing us before, you'll see that a 6.5 is a couple of assessment criteria are in fact 7, and a couple are still at the lower level at 6. So it should be fairly clear to you, or maybe to your teacher or to your friends. Ask those people, share your learning with other people. They should say, well, you are better at pronunciation, and your grammar is not so strong, etc. So it should be very clear to you what is stopping you from rising to that band 7. It's not really a mystery, really. So you have to then say, okay, it's grammar. That's the thing. And then you have to do something really important, I think. And I tell my children this, but they don't listen to me. Have a routine. I'm going to spend 30 minutes every morning on grammar, or something like that.
Yes.
And I think that is one way to approach that 0.5 that you need. What do you think about that?
I completely agree with you, Don. I would be wary of asking friends some advice when it comes to IELTS speaking, when you're preparing for a test. I usually find when I'm mentoring people, when people book in for a coaching session, and once I've shown them how this works and I've analyzed and showed them where they are strong in and where they're weak in and what they need to work on, what they can do about it. It's like a lot that goes on. So a lot of people don't know this, but the way we grade is you've got these 4 sections. This is speaking and writing. And we have to give you a band out of 9 for each section. So this is, for example, speaking. So if you get a 7,777, your average should be 7. If you get a 7,778, you'll still be a 7. If you get a 7,788, you'll be a 7.5. If you get a 7,888, you would still be, according to IELTS math, not real math, a 7.5, unless you get a 9,887. Then the better score could, your strong part, it could balance out the one you're lacking in. That's why I always said, remember what you're strong in as well, and then work on the one you're not so great at. So it's to see where it's happening. It's sometimes very difficult for people to, but if you record yourself, you can sometimes figure it out as well.
Yeah, that's right.
People have no idea what they sound like sometimes, and when they listen to themselves, listen back to themselves, they go, oh.
Now, when you were learning English, you didn't probably, I don't want to suggest that you're old, but you probably
You're
didn't
allowed
have,
to, it's fine, I love
you probably didn't have the advantage of YouTube, podcasts, all those things that we can find on the internet. Would you recommend that that is a very good place to start when learning language?
People are so lucky these days. People are so lucky these days with this access. Because yes, no, we did not have that. We not during university, nothing. Only later in the 90s. So this is all new. And so there are so many great podcasts to go and listen to and YouTube videos to watch. Just make sure these people are, if you are listening to anything regarding IELTS, make sure these people are accredited. Make sure that you don't just get somebody that is not sure what they're talking about.
That's true. And also, but it also applies to what some people think is standard English is in fact not standard English. And I know that there are English language newspapers in some countries. I'm thinking about India really here. And I know that English is an official language in India, and that many more Indians speak English than speak English in Australia. It's true, but IELTS is looking for standard English, and I've talked to quite a few Indian test takers and from other countries as well, and they assume that the English that they have come across in their own country is standard, and it isn't. So I think it's important that you be careful just to check, is this standard English? And of course you can do that in the same way that I suggested earlier, that you can just Google some of these phrases. Does this get any results if in a Google search? And very often it might not. And so you just be very careful about that. Some you mentioned a couple of newspapers in Australia, The Age, that's in Melbourne.
The Australian as well.
Australian.
Got the review.
But there are also very good English language newspapers in a person's home country. The Japan Times, for example.
Okay.
Or you might find, in the Middle East, there will be an English language newspaper. In many countries, just the Jakarta Post, I used to read when I was in Indonesia. Perfectly good English. That's a good place probably to start, because you're finding out information which is relevant to you, well expressed in English.
Yes, no, I completely agree.
All right, Rochelle, we're probably just about finished, unless you want to talk about anything else that you'd like to add as a very experienced teacher of English, or we could throw it open to a Q&A session, because I know
think
that there are
so.
quite a few questions coming up.
Yes,
Shall we do
I'm
that?
very interested in knowing what everyone would like to hear as well. I think that's
All right.
incredibly important.
Okay. So my very dear friend Annie Sun will have a few questions for me, and I am hoping to find them here. I'm going to the Q&A section, Annie. Just tell me if I'm doing this right. And I'm
You didn't
looking
have
at...
the internet as well, Don, when you were growing up?
I was born before TV, Rochelle.
I was born when the TV came out.
So actually, that means I'm very intelligent. For the first 2 years of my life, there was no TV. There's a question from Jane here, and the question is there a technique to get a high score in the writing test? Now, this is a very interesting question, and I'll start, and you can add something if you want to. There is no mystery. There is no secret recipe for getting a high score. We go back to the assessment criteria that we were talking about earlier, and you'll see that there are 4 assessment criteria basically for writing, and each one of those is 25% of the mark. And of course, there are 2 tasks. So really, you have 8 assessment criteria. You've got to look at each of those and fulfill what they are asking you to do. So very briefly, I won't spend too much time. Task achievement means you answer the question fully. But importantly, it means you understand the question to begin with. So if you're doing an academic task 1, you need to understand the graph. If you're doing a general training task 1, you need to understand the context. You need to understand the purpose of your letter. And in task 2, you need to understand how many parts there are to the question. That's the first criterion. Second criterion, coherence and cohesion. Make sure that you use paragraphing correctly. Make sure you use linking words appropriately, like and, but, so as well, of course. The third one, lexical resource, and Rochelle and I were talking about that. Learn phrases, learn groups of words, natural words, and spell them correctly, because that's very important in writing. And finally, your grammar. And it's not just accuracy. It's not just having the right tense or the right preposition or the right pronoun, but it's also having a range of grammar. So that means you can make a long sentence as well as short sentences. So practice writing a few long sentences as well. And then, my friend Jane, you will get a high score in the writing test, okay? There's another question from Maria Amelia Lopez Marquez. Any relation to Garcia Marquez? Maybe. Which themes do you advise that we prepare? Now, Rochelle, in the speaking, would you advise somebody to prepare particular themes?
No, I would not, because if somebody's over-prepared with some sort of theme and they're trying to adapt it, you're trying to steer everything towards what you were preparing for, then we may not think you're able to be spontaneous. Just sit there and try to see how you can talk with us about something that's there.
Nevertheless, there are some topics. I mean, you can't predict the topic, but very often there is a particular way of talking about serious topics, like, global warming or traffic or pollution or education or health or something like that. Yes. And if you do read things about those subjects, then you'll probably find phrases such as, the main problem with blah, blah, blah is such and such. You know, if the government did this, then such and such would occur. So
Of course,
you
yes.
sort of, you know, there are those phrases that you can use equally well in a speaking test and in a writing test.
I completely agree, Don. So that is what you can prepare is, again, I'll go back to reading as much as you can and listening as much as you can to conversational English and lifestyle articles. That because you will find phrases and you'll find, just if you read as widely as you can, you'll learn about so many different things, because especially when it comes to writing about your long topic, or when it comes to speaking in your third part, we want you to go and talk about things in general. And if you are limited in just being able to say what is your favorite color, that's not really going to help.
There's another question here that someone has asked: how do I improve my spelling? Now that's a difficult one because most people who speak English as a first language don't really worry too much about spelling, and that is because the more you read, the more you realize when something is not spelt correctly. You don't actually actively learn reading. You can just recognize when it's wrong. So my first thing would be read a lot, because then you will recognize if it's not spelt correctly. But there are rules in English spelling, often broken, but there are some rules as well, you know, using a double letter, for example, and, you know, and sounding out words, you know, it can help with your spelling. Would you like to add anything to that, Rochelle?
No, I'm actually agreeing 100% with what you are saying, because that is the same kind of advice I would have given too.
Yeah. And spelling is
very
important.
Visual. Yes, you need to see the words.
Yeah.
And spell them out.
If for example, just as an example, if you were to make about 7 spelling mistakes in your writing, you would probably not get a 7 for lexical resource, that criterion, because a 7 says that you don't make many spelling mistakes. If you made only about 5 spelling mistakes, you might get a 7 for your lexical resource. So it's
also
clear.
Depends what spelling mistakes, though. Sorry.
Sorry, go on, say it again.
It also depends. We can tell from deliberate spelling mistakes, as in a word that you couldn't spell properly, and words where you were writing so fast that some people will write, how can I explain this? Some people would write something and may leave something out, but we could see that they know how to.
Yeah, that's true.
They've used the word in other parts as well.
That's an important point, Rochelle, because one thing I always advise people who do the computer delivered IELTS test, sometimes you will make, because your fingers won't actually necessarily hit the right key, you might make a stupid typographical error, which is a spelling error. So you should be extra careful to check your work when you do the CD, the computer delivered test. We've got another question here. Does reading books increase vocabulary? I think we've already answered that question. And the answer is?
Yes, definitely, definitely, definitely.
Would you also add, though, Rochelle, that we should be systematic and methodical about learning words? In other words, you read a book, but you make a note of some words that you want to learn, and you revise those words so that you are actually actively learning words.
Makes such a difference. So when I was growing up, my mom used to say, let's learn a word a week in English. So yes, we speak English in South Africa as well, but we all know it's not my first language. So I wanted to learn a few more sophisticated words. So you, if you're reading something or listening to something, you may go, oh, I love the sound of that word, or I love it within that context. I just want to check what it means. Then you write it down, and then you consciously try to use it that week, for example.
That's right.
That is one way to go about it. Sometimes we need to, it's like practicing a muscle. When you practice a muscle, you get muscle memory. It's the same with your brain. If you use a word again and again, it's like someone saying, do not think of a white horse. And now you will start seeing white horses and thinking about white horses and finding them everywhere. The moment you become aware of a word or a phrase, especially when you notice it, you will start seeing it everywhere. And it's just.
And I would also add that if you're using that word, don't worry if you use it wrongly, because you might use it wrongly and embarrass yourself, but you're going to really learn that word. You know, a little bit of anxiety around a word, and that's going to really help you learn it. Another question we have from Maftuna from Uzbekistan, and I have some very good friends in Central Asia, Kazakhstan and other places. So hello to all of those if they're listening. I have a question. How can I improve my academic writing and speaking by myself? So this is a person who obviously doesn't have a lot of people around them who speak English, and they need to be able to self-study, to direct themselves. I think we've covered some of these things, that we can look at newspapers in English and we can use the internet and things like that. But how can you be sure, for example, that you're not making mistakes if you don't have someone, an English speaker, to talk to or to look at your writing? Difficult question, Rochelle.
Well, first of all, I think you can book a mentoring session, a coaching session, for example, with IDP. That really helps if you do that for speaking, and we can tell you exactly what you can work on. Also, you can talk about a topic for about 1 or 2 minutes and record yourself and then send it to someone who you know that their first language is English, and ask them for a bit of advice.
That's good advice, Rochelle. All of those things are possible. And
anything else, Don? Do you?
Well, I agree that we do have the writing assist and speaking assist for IDP, and we also have the progress check for IELTS. But you mentioned earlier that you can join groups of people, and if for example, you were interested in cooking, you know, you can join an adult education group who are learning how to cook Vietnamese food or something like that, and you will find lots of native speakers of English who you can make friends with, first of all, and who will also help you. And the other thing I would say is, tell them to correct you, because people are polite. People will say, oh, yeah, I know what you mean. I'm not going to correct you. But tell them, look, I really want to be accurate. So if I make a mistake, tell me.
I love that example, because when you join some sort of group, if it's an activity that you are interested in, again, language is so much part of the right brain that is creative, and it's like a child that wants to play, and you learn better when you're having fun and when you're playing when it comes to language. Look at how children learn language. They do things together. They have to, in language classes, you get situations that you have to practice together to pretend you're in a situation. So for example, if you're in a cooking class with other English speaking people, you will almost become less embarrassed about your language and be more interested in learning cooking. But you would have to ask for passing, you know, can you pass the salt? Can we mix this? Right. Like I was in Germany, you were forced to ask for things, and contribute.
And if you're very lucky, you might have one of your questions in the speaking test might be about cooking.
Hey.
That would be very lucky. And we have another question, and this is really a question about clarifying. Do you mean in the speaking test we don't need to really give an accurate answer for the questions that are asked? And I think that's what we said. Really, you don't have to tell the truth, do you?
Don't have to tell the truth. However, I would advise just be as honest as you can. If you, for example, just tell us why you're saying what you're saying. Take us from A to B and tell us why you're doing that. For example, if your topic was about animals, and in part 2 and in part 3 I say, okay, we've just talked about animals, can you please tell me, do you think cats make good pets? And let's pretend you don't know cats. Let's say, I always give students this example, you just got off a boat this morning, you've lived on a boat all your life, you don't know cats, so you would have to tell us, I'm so sorry, I don't know anything about cats. I've lived on a boat all my life. I can tell you about crabs or fish, but I have a friend who sends me cat videos of their cat at home. Can I tell you about that? You are trying, show us you are willing to share something you might know, but tell us why. Don't keep quiet and go, cats. I want to tell you about a funny cat video. I will have no idea why you want to do that, and not just.
That's right. Very good point. Explain, put some context around it.
Just do that and you'll be okay. So you don't have to be exactly specific.
Yeah. And as I said before, that you don't really have to answer a question directly in the speaking test. You can speak around the question. We have one remark, hello from Germany, with a smiley face. So that's for you, Rochelle. So if people are listening to you in Germany. What is the best, another question, what is the best website for practicing or improving our IELTS skills? So we've talked about using the internet. Are there any specific websites that you would recommend?
That I would recommend?
Or anyone. Well, let me begin. I would recommend that there are some very good in America, in Britain, in Australia, in Canada. The public broadcasters produce very good material for English language learners. So in Canada, the CBC, in America, the Voice of America, the BBC in Britain, and the ABC in Australia. And even if you're in a different country, you can still access all of these things. They are useful, especially if you are at a lower level, perhaps, than a band 7. If you are at a band 7 or better, then go straight to anything, podcasts, news broadcasts, TED Talks, YouTube videos. Any English will help you.
We're not endorsing everything they are saying. We are just merely recommending to listen to how they speak, how do these people hesitate when they are native speakers? How do they group their words? What do they do when they're not sure of an answer? They may not know everything, but they may then come up with something else. And that's the best way to get to know the culture of a place, when you listen to those local.
Yeah, I agree. There's another question here. Is there a students group for practicing speaking skills? Now, I can speak about Melbourne because I live in Melbourne, or have lived in Melbourne. There are, the Melbourne City Council has a, I can't remember the name of it at the moment, but they have a hub for people who are learning English, and it's out opposite the Victoria Market, as I recall. And they run sessions for people, conversation sessions. But I would also recommend universities, ring them up technical colleges, even other institutions, councils, as I mentioned before. I would just Google something like English conversation groups. And wherever you are, you'll probably find something. Would you agree, Rochelle?
I agree completely. When I was new to Melbourne, I joined, it was called meetups. And then you can meet up with people with similar sort of, for example, if you want to learn the language, or if you are into cooking, or if you want to learn Spanish and speak to other Spanish people. I think it was called meetups, one word or something.
Yeah.
And you just find people with similar desires in that sense.
We have another question here about speaking. What are the things that we need to prepare for the speaking section? And this is an interesting question because we can prepare things for speaking. And I'll just say a couple of things and you can add to it if you like, Rochelle. But there are 3 separate sections to the speaking, and it's quite predictable in some ways. So in the first section, you can predict that you will be asked something like, what things do you like? And it might be clothes, food, hobbies, sports, etc. But the other big question in part 1 is why? Why? So practice answering. Why do I like football? Why do I like nasi goreng? You know, why do I like the color blue? Now that's something you can prepare. In the second part, where you have to speak for 2 minutes, you can prepare that as well. You can practice making notes for 1 minute. And this is a good skill to practice because that really helps you speak for 2 minutes. So do that. And the third thing is, it's very much like a writing task too. Have some ideas about big issues, education, the law, etc. Would you like to add anything to that, Rochelle?
Well, I really liked what you were saying. And what we used to, how you can practice as well for the speaking for the part 2 is how we used to prepare. For example, when I was younger, when I did drama, we would be given anything. We would be given a pen or an apple, and then we had 1 minute to prepare something about what we'll say about it. It's almost like a game. And then you had to put the timer on and start telling people about this thing. And the more you would do it, the more you'd get used to it. And the more ideas you have, the better as well, because it just makes it more interesting and fun. You almost, I'm sorry to say this, you almost have to have fun doing this, because then you must pretend.
That brings me to the next question. Now, I think this will be the last question because it's only 1 minute left. A quick question. Can we talk informally? I get anxious when thinking about being formal. So when in the speaking test, how formal do you have to be, Rochelle?
Okay. So pretend you've been invited to a dinner party and you've got to go and sit at this table full of English-speaking people that you don't know, but they are welcoming. They all want to share food with you. So obviously you're not going to swear in front of them because you don't know them and you want to make a good impression, but you're also not going to speak to them like in a job interview. All right. So you want to talk, you want to sit at that table. First, you'll talk a little bit about yourself because they will ask you 100 million questions about yourself, just like in the speaking test. What do you like? Do you like hats? And then there will come a part where we will, in the last part of the speaking test, you will start talking about life, you know, and that is the attitude. And what normally helps is take a bottle. You're allowed to take a bottle of water with you into the speaking room. Make sure it can close. Take that with you and imagine that is your cup of coffee or your cup of tea or your beer or your wine or whatever it is you have at the table. And just speak with this examiner in that way. with respect, but also in a way where you'd like to share things with this person, and that will take the pressure off, I promise you. And that's what we want.
Yeah, that's
we
good
want
advice.
to see, how will you deal with a new country? How will you speak with people around you? The person stopping you in the middle of the road, asking you for directions. Can you help them? Can you ask how? Can you say how you want your coffee?
Yeah, that's good. And I would also just add that the examiners are really keen for you to do well. That an examiner doesn't want you to fail because it makes their job difficult. So they want you to be successful. They want you to be fluent. They want you to perform beautifully. And so they will do everything that they can to help you do that. All right, Rochelle, look, we've come to the end of our time.
Okay.
And I have enjoyed very much talking to you. I haven't seen you for a while. And it's been great talking to you. And I'm hoping that everybody has gained something from our conversation. And remember that if you have any questions that we haven't answered, put them on Facebook and we will answer them. And I wish you the very best in your IELTS test when it comes up. All right. Thanks again, Rochelle.
Same here.
All right?
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.